Welcome back to the show, folks. It is The Cut right here on UTN 15.2. I am Craig Shelton. You're watching The Cut, man. We love to talk sports with you right here, standing outside the studio where we will be taping our new online show, Creep Radio. We'll be giving you more information about that, but let's get right back to it with Angelo Lawford and John Harris from Yahoo Radio. Sports Talk Live, good evening. I'm Craig Shelton. This is the second segment of the show. If you're just now joining us, where the hell have you been? I would assume you've probably been out in that traffic, right? It's nasty out there. It's cold out there. So get in, pop the cap on one. If you're one of those people that like to pour up a little brown, warm your chest a little bit, sit back and enjoy. On today's show, will be quite a lot of Texans talk, to be frank with you. We're not going to force the issue. I do have some NBA things I'd like to touch on a little bit. Before we jump back into the Texas talk, how about Jay-Z getting it done, man? Did you see the story with the Cano contract? Jay-Z jumping out there, making things happen as a sports agent, and he's already getting that hate. They hating on Jigga Man because he's making people money. It's one thing that just doesn't make sense in America is hating on a person for making people money. But we're going to keep it football for most of the show. You can guarantee that. I want to thank the players and coaches for all of the work they have put in during my years with the Texans. Though we came up short this season, the work, effort, and sacrifice they gave me in this organization over the last 8 seasons is not to be taken for granted. I wish them all the best. That's from Coach Gary Kubiak, former head coach of the Houston Texans, who was fired yesterday. Unless you've been on another planet, you know all about it by now. We left you guys at the end of the last segment discussing Rick Smith's comments that we read, where he said that basically, I'll paraphrase it, what has happened with the team is just unacceptable. My issue with that is, well, Rick, you're a part of it, but how much a part of it? Do you guys buy that Rick Smith was a true GM in a sense? I'll take a quote from Stephanie Stradley, who does a blog on the Texans website here in Houston, and she made the comment on CBS Radio a couple days ago, and again, I'm paraphrasing, but Stephanie commented that Rick Smith did not have the power. She said Gary Kubiak had the power. Wade Phillips had the power. She even referred to Rick Smith as a minion. And how could he dare question Kubiak or Wade Phillips, stating that was the way that they felt about it? Then in the same sentence, she blamed Rick Smith for every issue the Texans has ever had. And I tweeted, I'm like, Stephanie, my God, in the same sentence, since you've seen Stephanie on shows with us before doing coverage with HMW, I'm like, wait a minute, how can Rick Smith have no power, but at the same time, you blame him in the same sentence for every problem the Texans have had? I mean,
you can't have it both ways.
No,
I mean, it's one or the other. Here's the way I look at it, Craig. And I use this analogy. I thought about this. I wish I would have thought about it during my radio show, but I thought about this yesterday in the afternoon. And a lot of people have seen the show Breaking Bad. You've seen the show Breaking Bad.
Love that series.
Remember the end of season 4? Gus Fring goes to the hospital, and boom, he gets blown up, and Walter takes a call from his wife, and Skyler is freaking out and going crazy. And she's like, oh my God, this is all over the news. Did you do this? Are you behind this? You remember what Walter White said? He said, I won. Rick Smith is Walter White. He just won the meth empire, the Houston Texans. He is now going to take over. And we know how it went for Walter White in season 5. He took over the meth empire, and it was a little bit bigger maybe than he even thought it was. But my point is, Walter White was huge in helping Gus Fring, but Gus Fring was clearly the leader in all this. And if you think back to how the Texans were organized back after Dom Capers was fired and Charlie Casserly was let go, who got hired first? Gary Kubiak. Who then got hired after? Rick Smith, the GM. How many football organizations, or how many organizations do you know that hires number 3 before you hire number 2? Isn't number 2 supposed to hire number 3? That's usually the way it goes, but the power structure that's been set up was Gary Kubiak got hired first, then Rick Smith. And I kind of think that power system has been in play the whole time. And if you listen to what Bob McNair said during the press conference, as Angelo talked about, all the things that we've talked about as fans and analysts, the innovation, the ability to make change, adjustments, those are things that Bob's not going to pick up on his own. Those are things that Minion, use that word if you want to use it, has been in his ear saying, hey, these are things we need to do. These are things we're not doing. And I'm distancing myself from what we're seeing on the field.
Yes.
Remember that decision in the draft room? That was his player, not mine. Look, it gets to be a very – if we don't think politics are involved in the NFL, if we don't think politics are involved in any of this, it don't matter what business you're in. Politics are involved, whether it's radio, schools, churches, NFL. There are politics involved. And my point in that is that Rick Smith has been playing a political game in some sense to say, look, that's not the way that I would have done it. Well, guess what, Rick? Your show now, pal. Your show now.
Hashtag
You've
all
now
eyes
taken
on Rick.
Exactly.
All
It
eyes
is.
on Rick,
It is
right.
your meth empire now, Walter White.
And
what are you gonna do with it?
And I say that, I say all eyes on Rick, and I don't mean it as if I doubt what he can do. The thing about Rick is, I think if most people
We just don't know what he can do.
We don't know.
Right.
See, we don't know, and I think how can you be a huge Rick's? How can you term yourself an insider with the Texans, or a person or individual that has covered the team closely and knows what's going on around the team as well as anyone, and have any type of deep ire towards Rick Smith? You really can't, not because of any lack of ability on your own to decipher through politics of a team or to understand what you see on the field in regard to talent evaluation. No, it's not about any of that. It's about that eerie way that the Texans are ran.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas,
or were.
It's not just about, how the media is fed information. It's about that entire culture around. You've been in the locker room,
Mm-hmm.
You've been at practices. And I'm not saying that it's so much different than some other NFL franchises. I'm not saying that at all. But what is hugely different is what you talked about. Hiring number three. You hiring your number 3 guy first, and then you're hiring your number 2 guy.
That power structure doesn't
So
make sense.
Who believes at some point that flipped?
Right.
To the point to where it flipped on a timely enough timeline where we can say this is on Rick Smith. Now, I sound like a Rick Smith defender to a person who's hearing what they want to hear. But what I'm trying to explain to you folks is the difference between Gary Kubiak and Rick Smith is Gary Kubiak coaches the team. And we see the not just the games they lost, we saw the team fall apart. We saw the undisciplined football play. We didn't see a team go out and play disciplined football and get beat by teams that were more talented and just better. We saw a team go out and completely fall apart in every phase of the game.
Right.
That's why it's easy to place blame on Gary Kubiak. The thing about Rick may not ever be a great GM. We don't know. But that's the whole point, is we just don't know yet. And then here's the other caveat to the situation. Anyone who ever thought that Rick Smith was going to be fired with Gary Kubiak apparently lives in a world of monopoly money. Because if you thought that guy who just signed that extension,
Right.
with another, 3 years left on it?
3 years.
So you thought Bob McNair was going to fire Kubiak, hire a new coach, next year pay Kubiak and the new coach, also fire Rick Smith, hire a new GM, and pay 2 GMs for the next 3-4 years. Not very likely at all. And I never thought that Wade Phillips would be fired. I'm not saying I didn't think he should be, but I never thought he would be fired because I just don't think, and that's one thing we are right about, the people that think what I think. We're right in thinking that Bob McNair doesn't think that this thing is really broken to the point where it can't be fixed in a year or so, and that's what scares me. And we're going to get into that in the next segment more. That's what scares me going forward because I've got to get there while I have the luxury of having you in studio. I'm concerned that Bob McNair thinks that this is a quick fix, and it might be. But that tells me that Bob McNair is probably going to go in the draft and draft Teddy Bridgewater. No, I don't want the Texans to draft a quarterback with the overall pick, folks. I want the Texans to take the best football player in America. His name is Jadeveon Clowney. He's better than Teddy Bridgewater. Teddy Bridgewater may be a good NFL quarterback. Right now, my analysis of him is more of a good passer than a good football player. I might be absolutely wrong because I grant you I haven't seen enough games first quarter to fourth quarter to see him in enough adversity over his career to just be really honed in on him like maybe I was with a Matt Leinart or a Vince Young or some others, Andrew Luck, RG3, or more recent guys. Boy, this is convoluted. It's got a lot of twists and turns through the guts of Reliance Stadium. You know what I mean? Angelo, let's pick Bob McNair's brain a little bit. Let's try to find out what he's thinking. I'll give you some quotes. We felt like that we had the best roster we've ever started the year with, and we really, really anticipated a very favorable outcome. Now, here's where you would like to think that Rick Smith comes into play. Really, was this roster really that good starting the year? Because I can pick holes all through that statement at numerous positions, starter and depth-wise, but we don't know. We don't know where that came from. Give me 30 seconds on that, Angelo.
Personally, he seems a bit out of touch to me. And maybe
Bob McNair seems out of touch.
yeah, and maybe I don't know, for lack of a better statement, almost like somebody who's channeled not to like what's happening with the team directly, but what people think about the team from the outside looking in. I remember one of his things a couple of years back was what the other owners and managers were telling
That
him
you
about
on the right
how
path,
good they
yeah.
were. And then, you listen to the media and especially here, everybody was just seeing the bright side of things. And
Yeah.
he's just listening and honed in on the positive side, the bright side. So he, in that regard, I think he's a bit out of touch.
Yeah, we got about 10 seconds, folks. What we're going to do when we come back from break, we'll continue picking Bob McNair's brains. I got a few more bullet points on that regard, and then we're going to talk about personnel next year. We'll be right back.